Pax Vobiscum. Happy Tuesday. I have Will here. He's from Kerrville. We actually met online. He was one of the people that reached out, and we kind of struck up a friendship that way. And we actually coincidentally went to the San Diego temple together because we were both there on separate trips, and we found out we were going at the same time. So he's one of my first guests on my channel, and we are going to talk about cigarettes and coffee. And Will, actually, you're the one that brought this up to me and recommended it to me. And so I was actually curious, like, why did you pick that? Like,
well, really, how it came about was I kept seeing this meme about the NASA cup that they built. And
what NASA cup?
It was a specialized zero-G cup to hold coffee.
You sent that to me, yeah.
And the design of it is very reminiscent of female genitalia. And I sent it to you with a joke saying, man, this makes me really want coffee.
Yeah, I remember that. Oh, that's funny. But yeah, so actually that gave me like a great idea, right? Because oftentimes the word of wisdom came out, and then it's really big for the Latter-day Saint faith to follow the word of wisdom, and that includes no coffee, no tobacco and stuff.
Well, no coffee, no tobacco. And the joke was in reference to, again, the shape of the cup and the LDS faith's law of chastity as well. And so that's how it dovetailed together, because coffee is a euphemism for...
got it. Oh, that's actually a beautiful tie-in to like find that symbolism in just like a random cup like that.
Right.
So that's actually really cool. But speaking of which, right, so give me a little background, because I was researching it. I started my DNC series, and so I haven't gotten there yet. Yeah. But can you like inform me and inform anyone that's watching, like what exactly, like where did this originate from?
So it originated from a revelation that Joseph Smith had. And the lore that is commonly put forth is that the meetings that the brethren were having were just giant smoke-filled rooms leaving ash everywhere. And then, of course, the prevalence of hot drinks being more of a ritualistic, addictive chemical, they wrote this revelation out as a guide for ultimately clean living. Now, it also goes through and talks about the proportions of vegetables and meat and things like that. And
does it go into detail about those things, or is it just kind of give like the overview of like hot drinks, or does it specify it?
It actually just goes into hot drinks is what the revelation itself calls out. The clarification that came down about 70 years later in the early 20th century was that it was directly explicit in calling out coffee and teas.
Okay.
And there was a societal carve out for hot chocolate, oddly enough.
Oh, so like, wait, was hot chocolate included in that? Or?
No, hot chocolate was excluded from that.
Okay.
And that's also how the idea that we were prohibited from consuming caffeine altogether, because it was understood that coffee and tea contained high amounts of caffeine.
Yeah. Because that actually, I looked into the history of like why tobacco, why these things, like why did those things actually even become prevalent in like human society, right? Because I found out that tobacco actually originated in the indigenous tribes, like in the Americas. And then Columbus actually ended up bringing it back to Europe, and it just spread like wildfire by the 1500s. And then coffee actually originated in Ethiopia, but then Yemen, it became more of like a standardized drink in Yemen and spread across the world globally. But you're right about that, though. The substance, the psychoactive substance, and why those things are actually like particular to us is because of the caffeine. And so back then, right, in the 1800s, the caffeine component was not necessarily known commonly, but people were aware that like coffee and tea were just very heavily, robustly embedded into society. Just like I would say like coffee and tea is equivalent to like having a phone these days, like with how prevalent it was in society and just how common it was for people to use.
Exactly.
And so I think when like the background that I understand was like one of the reasons that the tobacco came about, because tobacco was again heavily embedded into society. It was just commonplace for people to smoke, drink, spit, and like stuff like that. And it's a gross habit, like. Yeah. And if anyone's familiar with it, right? If you ever go through like the Las Vegas airport and you go to like the casinos where you can like smoke at it, it just is it smells. It's just like you can tell it's an unpleasant environment to be in, you know. And so you can like easily understand how like that would be something that is unpleasant, right? You're starting a new church, you're starting these things, and then you have this environment where you have these like smells and like trash of like the tobacco and stuff everywhere.
And even though they didn't have the science to back it up, there was still somewhat of an understanding that if you smoked heavily, it would impact your lungs.
Yeah.
And so it was also a very good.
Well, I don't know if like at that time, like even medicine wasn't aware that the detriments of tobacco.
No, and they also didn't understand at that time, how hygiene impacted one's health.
Yes.
And so, but that's also why, as a church, we believe that it was inspired because we were. The science that came out behind the tobacco use in terms of smoking it.
Yes.
It was proven that, you're not supposed to smoke this stuff.
Yes.
And
yeah.
even
it's
the
proven,
Native Americans, they would only smoke tobacco
in ceremonial things.
In ceremonial events. And keeping it to that, so they understood the detriments of recreational use.
Mm-hmm. And so it seems as if, and I always found this a curious point too, right? Because the word of wisdom, it goes very specifically and targets tobacco. It says it outright, like tobacco, don't use it. It names it definitively as a substance, but then the hot drinks, it leaves it to the ambiguity. And so that's a beautiful tension, I would say, in the text where it's like something that's very definitive versus something that's ambiguous. Because again, it allows for the definition, the meaning to emerge and update as like the human society and like more knowledge becomes available. Right? Because like, again, back in those days, caffeine, like people were unaware that caffeine was the psychoactive component of why coffee and tea became so prevalent. People weren't aware that nicotine was the psychoactive component in tobacco that made that become what it is today, right?
Right.
And so I think back in that time, it just shows a little bit about how forward thinking the revelation was, because of the fact that it would point out that like, hey, like hinting at like psychoactive substances may play an influence on human anatomy and physiology.
Right. Well, and even then, just making sure that meeting spaces were kept, as you described, going to a casino in Las Vegas, it becomes an oppressive environment if everyone is smoking, or even just 50% of the people are smoking.
Yeah.
The air it creates becomes incredibly toxic.
Yeah. And it's just like unpleasant to be in. It's like being in smog, right? It's being in pollution kind of thing. But so my thing with that, with how it's so curious how it's developed over time, because I always think about things like, what function did it serve? Like, why were these things given as instructions for people to follow? And so I think oftentimes people be like, oh, it's for like demonstrating obedience and like, can you follow rules type thing, right? It leads to health benefits and things like that. But then it comes into the point where like, where do we draw the line, right? Because like, just like hot drinks, it didn't emerge till later that it included coffee and tea, and it left off like other things, right?
Right.
And so it just like for instance, right? Like what about like cold pressed coffee, things like that.
Yeah.
Or like teas made from roots, like in different, like in like Eastern cultures, like Hinduism and China and Asia and stuff like that, they use different parts of like things to make teas and coffees, but they don't necessarily use those substances.
Right.
And so was the purpose of it to avoid caffeine, the psychoactive component, or was it to just show discipline and obedience towards following a set of rules?
I think it's more to show discipline and your willingness to obey laws that come down and what we perceive as God. And the side effects of it also being good for one's health just reinforces that idea that following God's laws are beneficial to man.
Yeah.
And I would extrapolate that to, watching what we imbibe and making this like the 11th commandment, which I'm not saying it is the 11th commandment, but equating the 10 commandments to that, like if you take all those out, they're very vague on a face.
Yeah.
But what does killing mean when it says thou shalt not kill?
Yes, exactly. And I think oftentimes people equate it to human beings, but they don't equate it to animals, right? They don't draw the line at life in general. They draw the line at human life.
Right. And, the holding that reverence for that sort of thing. But I think that ambiguity exists if you take all of God's laws that contained within the Bible to be that sort of ambiguous thing, and you have to be a human with discernment to extrapolate that out into all the various facets of your life.
Yeah, and I agree with that too, right? Because, and I love how you said it's kind of like the 11th commandment, because if you look at the 10 commandments, they're very simplistic, right? They're very like, let's teach people how to become an organized society that can sustain like through the ages type thing, right? So you need just basic principles of good order and discipline.
Right.
And so like back in like first century, like Americans, right? Or first century just human beings, they needed help, right? Because it was normal to just take stuff, being like, oh, I want that, I'm just gonna kill you and take it, right? And so obviously the 10 commandments were just very basic, being like, let's try to follow these basic principles. But if we look at modern era, right? Like we don't, like society doesn't necessarily struggle. Like I didn't have to remind myself not to like harm anyone today.
Right.
Or like kill anyone or, you know, things like that. And so it's actually really interesting that you called it the 11th commandment, because I would say that like in today's society, if we were to have a revelation where it was like to kind of equivalent to introducing the revelation for the coffee and tea and tobacco and stuff, it's like in this modern era, it would be like using your phone, like not having a phone type thing, right? Limiting the electronics, limiting how many streaming apps you have, that type of thing, social media accounts. That would be more applicable to our society. Because if you look back in like the 1800s, it was very atypical. It was a hard ask, you could say, for people to take away from something that was like status quo.
Right.
Like it was so widespread, so common, and it would again be equivalent to like the church coming out being like, we're not going to use TikTok. Like that's a command. We got a revelation saying, hey, we're going to limit our streaming apps.
Yeah.
So it's like what's normal in our society, and like how do you differentiate yourself from everyone else that's out there?
Yeah. Well, and even then, you know, dietary restrictions are not an uncommon thing in any religion. And if you look back as to why certain dietary restrictions were implemented, it was largely attributed to God, but it also had real world manifestations.
Yes.
Of, oh, if I don't do this, I'm not going to die.
Yes, exactly. And I think that came also to like these days, like there's like a lot of stuff about like what products are in our food, right?
Yeah.
Like the red dyes and things on the labels that people can't recognize. And there's a large push, it seems like, for accountability on like these manufacturers and the consumers to try to go away from those things.
Right.
And that could easily, right, like necessarily, I feel like society has reached a point where we don't necessarily need a revelation to be like, hey, let's avoid eating like saturated like food and things like that.
Yes.
Because we've developed enough self-agency like as like an individual and like taking care of ourselves to recognize, hey, these are things that we want to avoid. These are things that we want to consume.
Right.
And so I think actually like that, the word of wisdom kind of laid the groundwork to allow people to be like, hey, be more aware of what you're putting into your body. Even though I'd argue, right, like using these substances within balance, you're not going to necessarily die from it, right? Because having too much water, you can overdose on water,
Yes.
right? It's just learning about how much self discernment do you have, right? Do you need your hand held every single time of the way? Like, do you need someone to give you a list when you go to the grocery store being like, only buy these things?
Right.
Right? We're at a point where we're mature enough where we can make those decisions on our own versus like a child. If you were like, go grocery shopping for us.
Yeah, they're just going to hit the candy aisle.
Your cart is going to look a lot different, than if we went to the grocery store.
Yes.
And so I appreciated that exists because again, in the 1800s in that time frame, coming out and telling like the church was just organizing. I think like came out in 1833 and the church was like officially founded in 1800. And so it's very new, like 3 years trying to organize and to come out and be like, hey, let's try to abstain or withdraw or like limit how much we're doing everything that everyone else is doing. That's a big ask, right?
Oh, yeah.
And that's a huge thing too for developing a sense of identity because it takes a lot of effort, right? Because if I guarantee you if the church was like, hey, let's do a challenge where we spend more time with our families and we put our phones away. We just like turn our phones off for a month and we just do in-person communication, old school type communication.
Yeah.
A lot of people would struggle with it.
Yes.
It would be a huge undertaking, and I think a lot of people would have a hard time with it. But at this point, right, like abstaining from coffee, tea, things like that, it's just like you grew up as that's your norm. It's like the status quo for like within LDS, it's normal, right? It's like it's not as challenging because that's the environment that supports that behavior.
Right. And so for converts or even someone like myself who left for 20 years and was
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, was dubbed inactive for 20 years. So I did start to consume coffee. I did try smoking, try being the operative word. My physiology does not permit me to smoke. But I will say that partaking in sitting around a hookah with friends, there's something magical about that.
Dude, I honestly, like, I've tried, like, I'm a fan of trying every substance at least once to some capacity because, I mean, it exists for a reason and there's so many people that have those experiences. And so if you do it, I think respectfully and safely, you gain more experience, more knowledge, more awareness, right? Because oftentimes people say, oh, that's bad. But then you can actually physically talk about what it does, what the experience feels like.
Yeah.
So,
well, and you know, again, it's that not everyone owns a hookah.
yeah.
You know, if you brought one into your home and was smoking it every day, that's a problem.
Yeah.
But if you're going to some place and spending time with other humans and discussing
Dude, well,
topics,
it's in the Middle Eastern culture, right? Like if you're gonna go into like a home, it's almost like a peace pipe, right?
Yes.
They're inviting you into their culture and accepting you as one of theirs. And it's almost like an honor. And like if you like decline it, it's almost like a slap in the face to them kind of thing, you know? And so the fact that you were able to partake in it and not feel like guilt or shame and then create those connections, I think is just huge. That speaks more, I think, to like your capacity and like your like being a Latter-day Saint than someone that would just decline it outright, right? Because then that connection with those people, you don't necessarily have that because you like abstain from their culture type thing.
right?
And so that's beautiful that you're able to do that though, to be able to like experience that because it really is like in Middle Eastern culture, and I don't think in Western culture people realize that, it's like a very symbolic, it's a very spiritual, it's a meaningful practice.
Yes.
Like, just like how going to the temple carries that symbolic weight, that meaning, that reverence. For them in that culture, it carries the same type of symbolic meaning and reverence and weight.
Yes. And you know, it's basically extension of sharing your table with someone.
Exactly.
And yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And so I think, honestly, like I was trying to think about it too, being like, what was the purpose? Like what function does giving these things do beyond just like demonstrating obedience, right? Because like an individual person, if they put forth a goal to like try to become a better version of themselves, usually to become a better version of yourself, you have to introduce some sort of contrast, introduce some sort of discomfort.
Right.
And what is the easiest way to do that except to deprive yourself of something that is normal and routine?
Yes.
Right? Because every day, like if like I've gone on coffee breaks before too, simply because I enjoy depriving myself of my creature comforts. And so it's challenging, right? And then it makes me appreciate things more. I wouldn't say that it necessarily changes any perspective for me, but it allows me to show like, hey, like I have the discipline to do this. I have the discernment to do this. And so when I get into these situations where I'm offered these things, right, can I navigate them safely?
Yes.
And I would honestly, like one time when I first started to hang out with the philosophers in Oklahoma City, actually, when I was there, they were smoking, the two things that they were smoking openly was meth and weed. And so they actually offered me a hit of their like joint, and I took it because I was like, oh my gosh, this is like a peace pipe offering. Because I found out later they thought I was police. They thought I was like undercover police. But because I accepted that, like taking a hit of their joint, they kind of like saw like, oh, like she's one of us. She's not here to judge us. She's not here to try to help us. She's just here to be present with us and just learn about us kind of thing. But when they did offer me meth, I declined, right? I'm not going to be like taking everything. But the fact that I accepted that and I was comfortable enough because I recognized what it symbolized, that I think like now I'm actually going out in November one of the homeless guys I met, he's graduating from college.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, he like got off the streets. He like got his like life cleaned up. Like he's graduating college, and like I'm like stay in contact with him. Another one, she just got into an apartment. She got approved for an apartment.
Nice.
And honestly, like a big part of that interaction was literally because I was brave enough and comfortable enough to accept taking a hit of weed with them.
Right.
And that wouldn't have been, I don't know if like I would have been like as part of their journey unless I would have done that, right? And been immersed into that culture. But was it a risk? Yeah, like absolutely, right? Anyone could easily say like, ooh, that is not a good call, right?
Right.
But you know, sometimes you just got to have that faith and trust that like this is the right thing to do type thing. And I did. I made that call, and I'm just so thankful I did.
Yeah.
And so that I think with like the word of wisdom, it comes into my tension with this is that like it's used as a requirement for determining worthiness.
Right.
And for me, it's just like, okay, if we're gonna do that, what is the source of worthiness? Are you just judging a person on being able to demonstrate discernment, being able to demonstrate self-agency, right? Like if, like an example I said was if, for instance, there was like a grocery store gave everything away for free. And then if people came to the grocery store, how much would people take? Because mostly when people get stuff for free, they just take a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. And so would an LDS member take just what they need, or would they be like everyone else and take everything? Like, would you be able to distinguish a Latter-day Saint, a Catholic, an Islam, if there was like a free-for-all at a grocery store? You know what I mean? And so I think that in my head is a better test of whether someone is worthy or not, because it really truly shows through their actions. Like, are you embodying these principles, or are you just saying you're embodying principles of discernment, of stewardship, of discipline, right? Because it's so easy, and I've done it before too, like when like I go to like a fair and there's like free chapsticks and stuff, I'll like take one of everything. And then I started, as I've gotten older, I'm like, I don't need all of this.
Right.
I'll take one thing. I'll take like, I was like, oh, I need a highlighter. Let me take a highlighter. But previously I used to just be a glutton and be like, it's free, I'm taking everything. And so I think my thing is like, if you're gonna judge someone and determine their worthiness based on whether they consume a substance, what's the metric there, right? Are you judging them based on what they put into their body, or how they actually embody those principles and live on a daily life?
The way the question is phrased, it's more a self-assessment of do you embody those principles and live a clean life.
Yeah. But then it comes down to, right, what's defined as clean.
Right.
Right.
And the teachings that have come so far have largely just been, do not drink coffee, do not drink tea. But, you know, it's not expressly clear, like, if you get the herbal teas, like you mentioned, that are cold pressed, is that okay?
Yeah.
You know, it's not clearly defined. And, you know, are you getting one every day because you need it to function? Or are you getting it every day because you like the taste?
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure, right, the church clarified that even decaf coffee is not allowed. It's just like coffee dot period.
Yeah.
Like, and then so it comes down to a question, right? Because in the modern era, we have like synthetic coffee flavors. Does that count? Right? We have things where you can manufacture actual coffee flavored things that are synthetic. They're not from the coffee bean, but they taste just like coffee.
Right. Well, and why are the highest consumption of soda products and energy drinks in the state of Utah?
Yes, and
those are chemicals 6 ways to Sunday that should fall under the word of wisdom, but because it's not expressly given by the brethren,
exactly,
our leaders, the discernment is not there to abstain from, you know, stopping at the gas station every day and buying
so for me,
Monsters.
that's a bit of a concern, right? Because if the masses are not having enough discipline and discernment to be like, oh, this is actually probably more detrimental, like soda, like hands down, like dentistry wise, like soda, like this is terrible for my teeth right now because of the pH.
Yeah.
It's just carbonated water with some flavoring in it.
Yeah.
But
it's the flavoring that kills it.
yeah, right. But it's like the carbonation because of the pH. It decreases the pH and eats away at your teeth kind of thing, right? But at the same time, it's like, okay, how much discernment do the masses actually have? Like, yeah, you're able to follow the rules, but then like you're doing more harm to yourself and you can't even recognize it. Like, and you're waiting on someone to tell you that you shouldn't do that. Like, where's the discernment come in, you know?
Right. And I think that that's something that is a disconnect against not just the people of LDS, but
In
humanity
general.
in general.
Yes.
Of not being able to see apples and oranges and seeing that they're both actually fruit.
Yeah, right. I think there's a thing where people take things literally, and then there's like this symbolic layer, the meaning that emerges, right? Because if you look at the literal words, there's no correlation to what exactly those substances are.
Right.
It wasn't till later that that ambiguity converged and came down to a definition, a literal definition. And then once that literal definition has been given, people just don't even realize like other things fall into those categories that necessarily should be.
Yeah. Well, and like you said earlier, you know, the idea that if a new revelation came out today, it would be limiting our screen time.
Yeah.
And what does that look, and spelling out what that looks like for our modern population.
Exactly.
And so they haven't even come out and said like you need to limit screen time. It's just you need to choose what is on the screen at a given moment.
Yes.
And you know, that's just good policy, good social policy across the board.
Yeah. Well, that's just like good health for yourself too, like mental and physical health, right? Because if you're just looking at your phone all day and just scrolling, you're missing life, right?
You're missing life. And even then, these things are designed with algorithms and things that many people do not understand. And they are designed to, and there's a term for it, to get you just a doom scroll.
Yeah.
Just sit there and go through and look at all the bad news, all the bad news, all the hate, all the division, and think that the world is a terrible place when it's really not.
Yeah. Well, my algorithm, if I love pulling up like if you look at, I did this with my girlfriend. We're like, what does your thing say? Because you know how you can like see like what it is. Mine lately is like World Cup and Love Island. Because I started getting into Love Island.
Right.
So that's what mine all is. But it's funny to see like people's stuff. Like they'll have things that like they'll be like doomsday scrolling. If you doomsday scroll, click on things, when you go to like the search function, you'll see nothing but like bombings, you'll see nothing but the news, you'll see nothing but the politics, things like that. If you click on like food and like exercise, you'll see nothing but health and exercise things.
Yeah.
So it really is, I do appreciate the algorithm a little bit just because it tailors to what the person is like potentially, it kind of tries to predict what you're interested in.
Right.
But at the same time, it assumes that the user has enough discernment to be like, oh, my stuff is getting more biased towards one thing, or hey, I'm going down this rabbit hole. Let me try to diversify what I'm looking at. And people don't often have that realization or that awareness that they're being tailored to things and what their interests are showing about them.
Right, and how you are in control of that algorithm.
Correct.
And it's circling back to, you know, coffee and tea. It's the same thing. Do you take stock in your life and go, how is this coffee affecting me in my daily life? And has it become a ritual that you have to do every morning?
Yep.
Brewing it, pouring it.
Exactly.
Sitting on the porch and
exactly.
sipping it.
Because it's the habit. It's the habit. Because like, even though like innately drinking coffee isn't detrimental by any means, right? Like over consuming caffeine, sure, but like it takes a lot of caffeine, right? There's more caffeine in an energy drink, right? Because if you looked at why like coffee and tea were banned, you can be like, well, the reason it even became popular was because of the caffeine. The reason tobacco became popular was because of the nicotine.
Yeah.
So it's like, you can just isolate, now we have like nicotine pouches, right? We can isolate out the active ingredient and completely avoid tobacco, completely avoid all the detrimental things, and just isolate out the active ingredient,
right,
and do stuff with that. And there's products developed that way now. But then do people have the discernment to be like, oh, well, this isn't technically tobacco. Can I use this? And just same as caffeine, right? Oh, these energy drinks aren't technically coffee. even though the reason coffee and tea were banned was because of the active substance in it, which at that time wasn't aware, right? And then like also on top of that, right, you think about it, because this is based in the 1800s, right? I sometimes you see that these revelations are correlated to different societal and cultural things going on, because for instance, right, from like an Eastern perspective, like the Hinduism, right, they don't eat cows, they don't eat meat, or they don't eat beef or whatever, because for them it's a meaning, holy, sacred thing. Do you have enough discipline in this modern world to not partake in something everyone else is doing,
Right.
to show your devotion, to show the level of effort and resilience, right? So every type of culture has this type of thing, but then it comes down to, well, does that become a habit, right? Because all of a sudden, abstaining from these things has become your norm. Now, what are you doing to challenge yourself to get out of just this normal routine that you've fallen into?
Right.
So like for instance, like me going to the gym, right? Like people get into habits where they have a routine, like go to the gym at 5 a.m., go to the gym, whatever time. I purposely realized I was getting into those habits. So to change it up, I would purposely work out at different times just to introduce that stimulus to me, being like, do I have enough discipline to break my normal habits, but still maintain a level of integrity, a level of effort, a level of discipline that I wouldn't necessarily get elsewhere.
Right.
So.
And it is just self-mastery. And,
Yes.
It's something that, Jordan Peterson taught during COVID. The big thing going around was clean your room. Well, what does that mean, clean your room? Are we going to go full extreme where all we have is a mattress on the floor?
Yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Or is it just everything has a place and it's ordered?
Yes.
And it's using that discernment. What do I need
Exactly.
to function, to be the best version of myself?
Exactly.
And do these substances help or hinder my progress in becoming the best version of myself?
Yes. And I would agree to that. And I think honestly, the next step after demonstrating to yourself that you have that self-agency is being like, can I utilize these substances in a safe, in a balanced and a controlled way? Because it's easy to abstain from something because there's no temptation, there's no necessity for you to self-regulate, things like that. And I would argue that the next level of mastery, of control, of being able to demonstrate you have that self-agency and all the things that are taught about is, can you introduce these things and still behave in a way that is aligned with like the outcomes that you're desiring out of life?
Correct. Like, again, circling back to my inactive time, I was very much into drinking and consuming alcohol. And I got to a point when I started getting my expensive piece of paper that I realized I could not write code effectively when I was inebriated from alcohol.
Yeah.
And so I decided, you know what, that's enough.
Exactly.
But literally before that, I would show up and I was making mixed drinks at my workplace.
Yeah.
Like,
and that's honestly, I would say that's typical human behavior, right? Because when you're deprived of something, being like, no, 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 finally, when you have the autonomy to choose, you go all in. Right. But then you develop, like, you were able to recognize in your own self, being like, hey, I'm going to choose to refrain from this. I'm going to choose to cut back because I recognize I'm not being the person that I can be, like performing to my full capacity.
Right.
And then that, I think, is a huge level of mastery because someone didn't have to tell you that. You arrived at that conclusion on your own. And that's another level of maturity, right? That's another level of self-agency that I think a lot of people struggle with because they need someone to be like, you need to do this with your life, versus you're like, I'm going to choose to do this with my life because I want to and not because I'm being told to.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's, again, I think that is like the next level of showing what the word of wisdom was even trying to intend to do overall.
And it's just when you realize why rules are in place and when it is appropriate for oneself to break a given rule.
Yeah. Yep.
And knowing that you need to go back across the line.
Yes. Because, and I think that's a really good point too, right? Because those rules are not necessarily correlated to like civil rules, right? Because obviously, like breaking coffee and tea is going to have some maybe implications within the organization of the Latter-day Saints, but like you're not going to get a fine. You're not going to go to court over it, right? It's not like you're like you speeding or breaking into someone's house. Those carry different connotations.
Well, they have different consequences.
Exactly.
But being able to recognize that consequences that impact society, like speeding, and actions that are detrimental to oneself, should carry the same weight in one's mind.
Yes. Yeah, and I agree with that. And so I think though, what people though with that struggle with, I would say like the conflict or tension that arises around the word of wisdom is that people often take it literally and they just stop their thought process there. But then they don't realize that there's a bunch of other layers that can emerge from that. Like, what is the purpose of this? What is it trying to teach? What's the next step after demonstrating mastery of that basic level? Can you go beyond that? And I think that is the point that's lacking in demonstration.
And that's a lot of teaching that people are expecting to get from, I'll just say the clergy.
Yeah.
Which in the LDS faith is a lot of lay clergy.
Yeah.
And so they don't really may or may not have an understanding themselves.
Yeah.
On what to teach and how that is meant to be a baseline for judging the actions of oneself when imbibing substances.
Yeah. And
and adjusting your diet, just because everyone has, bacon and eggs every morning, what does that do to your body?
Yeah, exactly, right?
Are you going to need a bypass in 20 years?
Exactly.
Because you eat bacon every day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because that's a good point too, because you can follow all these things to the T, but you can still have comorbidities. You can still have develop cancer. You can still do these things. So it's just it's not necessarily a preventative measure, but I think again, it teaches good order and discipline. Same like how in the military training, right? Things are very regimented because you're dealing with high stakes environments in everyday life, right? And so the church is designed to teach you these principles that you can carry out into your everyday life and navigate potentially high stake environments without feeling a sense of anxiety, discomfort, disorientation about navigating those uncertainties.
Right. And equating it to the military is very apt in that there are many people within congregations that only take what the leaders say.
Exactly.
And they don't extrapolate, they don't expound, they don't like you said, explore the deeper layers of something.
Yeah.
And
I think that's completely fine, right? Because everyone learns at different paces, different levels where their understanding's at. But I think the part that's missing is that people don't recognize that there are different layers and they all compare each other to the same standard. And I think that standard is good for teaching basic principles of self-agency and discernment and things like that. But then when someone is deemed as not holding it to that standard of being as strict as other people, right? There's some people out there, I'm sure, that only put water in their body, dot period. Water is it.
Yeah.
Right? But then does that mean that the person that drinks soda is any less than them?
Right.
It's not. But then people automatically equate being I'm below them because all they put in their body is water. Right. That's a whole nother level that I didn't even think of, right? And so it just becomes what standard are you holding yourself to? And that kind of acts as hey, here's a good suggestion, a starting point. Expand on it how you can for what you need in your life.
Right. And it is am I judging another person because they drink diet sodas exclusively and are under the delusion that that's better for you?
Yeah.
When really a leaded soda, as I like to refer to it, has fewer of the chemicals than a diet soda.
Yeah. Yeah.
But just because the calorie count is different, you think you're doing better.
Exactly. But it's no, you guys are you're both participating in the same kind of thing, but you're just doing it to varying degrees.
Yeah, and it's how efficiently are you trying to kill yourself?
Yeah, exactly, right? But anyway.
And that's what coffee and tea really is. It's how effectively are these substances trying to kill you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, any substance is trying to kill you, I feel right? If too much of a good thing is a bad thing.
The planet is designed to kill us.
Yeah, right.
And it's our job to get us out of here alive.
Yeah. Oh, that's hilarious. Anyways, I could keep going on and on about this,
we
but
could talk for days on
I
this,
know.
but this has been fun.
This was
Thank
fun.
you so much.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do this again.
Yes, we will.
And so appreciate it. I'll get this edited. I don't know when I'm gonna release it, but I'm gonna try to get it out there soon.
Yeah.
So thank you for coming on, Will. You gotta say Pax Vobiscum with me. Ready?
Pax
Pax
Vobiscum.
Vobiscum.